If there's two things the Nintendo Switch just absolutely excels at, that's first party and independent games. In fact, I actually think the Switch is one of the best places to play independent games because of its hybrid form factor. They feel right at home on a device like this, and it's certainly one of my go-to consoles for these type of games. So what I want to do today is take a look at 30 of the best independent games that you can play right now on your Nintendo Switch. And honestly, this is only scratching the surface for what the Switch has available. It truly has an amazing catalog of independent games. So if I miss any of your favorites, I apologize about that. It was hard to narrow it down to just 30 games. But with that said, there's a lot to get into, so let's just go and jump right into it. Number 30, and to start this list off, I have Wild at Heart, a very similar, albeit different take on one of Nintendo's most unique franchises, Pikmin. Just like Pikmin, you manage these little creatures by the name of Spritlings, which all have their own unique abilities. But this is actually more of an adventure type of game, where you explore a more open world. There's places to uncover as you unlock these new Spritlings, and there's some really well-made, interesting puzzles if that's your type of thing. I'll also say one thing that pleasantly surprised me about Wild at Heart is its story. It's not necessarily going to take home any type of award, but it's a well-made story that captivates your imagination with its mythical world. If anything else here, you can tell that Wild at Heart was built by a creative team that truly cares about gaming. Number 29, Splasher. It's honestly shocking just how criminally overlooked Splasher actually is. I really have no idea why more people don't know about this game because truly, it is a phenomenal 2D platformer. It's kind of a combination of something like Rayman and Portal. It's a fast-paced game which is just a dream for speedrunning, but the main draw for Splasher is splashing different types of paint on walls to change their properties. Each color of paint will have their own individual property. So one might be sticky, which allows you to run on ceilings, whereas another one might have a bouncing ability to propel you to higher locations. This is a brilliant mechanic, and it's just a ton of fun to play. Number 28, Baba Is You. If you've yet to play this game, you've probably never played a puzzle game quite like it, and that's because the way it works is that in each level, you can change its rules by pushing and swapping blocks. It can honestly be mind-bending at times, and it really has its own unique way in almost making you feel stupid, but that's what makes this game so fun, because once you put your mind to it and you figure it out, you get that eureka moment. And to me, that's what makes a good puzzle game. The creativity, the challenge, and then the reward. And I think Baba Is You does all of that brilliantly. Number 27, Katana Zero. This is one of the most intense, fast-paced puzzle platformers that you can play. The brilliance of this game isn't just how it makes you feel both powerful and then also vulnerable all at the same time. You have all of these slick mechanics at your disposal that includes dodging, deflecting bullets, and you can even slow down time. But one mistake can cost you your life just like that. So it always emphasizes strategy and cerebral thinking, and most importantly, it prioritizes fun first and foremost. Number 26, Dead Cells. Now, Dead Cells is a really unique game of two ever-growing, albeit super popular genres, Metroidvanias and roguelikes. Now, that might sound like a bizarre combination at first, but I can assure you right now, when it comes to Dead Cells, they blend perfectly. And the reason it works just so well is because in Dead Cells, for every life that you have, you can unlock new abilities and find new shortcuts that you can use during your next playthrough. So it's got this really addictive loop to it, and it also has the right amount of challenge, and because of that, it's just insanely fun. Number 25, Buckaroo. Now, if you played back on the Nintendo 64, you might be familiar with the Goemon series, and Buckaroo is actually a spiritual successor made by the same developers. It's an enjoyable 3D platformer that takes you on an adventure through different Japan locales. Now, there are action elements and power-ups to beat up different types of enemies, but it's not necessarily an overly challenging game when it comes to its action. Still, it's a blast to play, and whether you grew up on the Nintendo 64 or the GameCube, Buckaroo kind of feels like it came straight from that era in the best way possible. Number 24, Dusk. Now, this is a game that a lot of the young, hip kids would call boomer shooters. Not really a big fan of that name, but no matter what you call them, these retro first-person shooters are just as fun as they are intense. And Dusk is a true love letter to first-person shooters like Doom and Wolfenstein, where it's all about speed and precision. And while yes, it wears its inspiration on its sleeves, it doesn't just pay homage to those games. Dusk really stands tall among the best entries this genre has ever seen. It has good atmosphere, it has strong mechanics, and really, even if you don't have nostalgia for this genre, I'd still say that Dusk is worth a try because there really is not many games out there like this in today's era, and it might surprise you just how fun they can be. Number 23, Neon White. I mean, quite frankly, Neon White's a weird game. It's a speedrunning FPS where you use platforming and a card-based system to navigate each stage as fast as you possibly can. The mechanics itself are relatively simple, almost similar to an arena shooter, and most levels can be completed in less than a minute. But where this game differs is in its card-based weapons. Each card has two different functions. One is to shoot, and then the other is to discard for a platforming ability. Now this adds an extra layer to its strategy as you try to optimize the best way to maximize your best time. This makes for a fun and unique experience. Number 22, Hyperlight Drifter. Now, this is a beautifully and also smartly designed game with a subtle story that's worth experiencing. And I'd say that's largely because of its gameplay. Its fast-paced combat not only challenges you, but it feels so good once everything starts to click in place. On the surface, its mechanics are relatively simple. You have a dash ability, you can melee, and you can shoot, but mastering them is where it takes more precision and skill, and that's part of its brilliance. Some of the best games ever are great because of their simplicity is maximized, and when it comes to Hyperlight Drifter, from top to bottom, it is expertly crafted. Number 21, Yooka-Laylee. Now, there's actually two different games I want to talk about here because I personally enjoyed them both. There's the original Yooka-Laylee, which is a 3D collectathon platformer inspired by one of my all-time favorite games, being Banjo-Kazooie. Then there's Yooka-Laylee in the Impossible Lair, which is the one that seems to be more universally praised. It's instead a 2D platformer that's more inspired by the likes of Donkey Kong Country. And in fact, these games are developed by Playtonic, which is a studio made up of former Rare Talent, which are the creators of the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy and Banjo-Kazooie. In short, though, Yooka-Laylee is a pretty traditional Banjo spiritual successor. If you like Banjo, I definitely think that you should check this one out. Though Impossible Lair, this one does have a twist on the Donkey Kong Country formula, as its overworld is actually interactive and kind of plays more like a top-down Zelda game where you solve various puzzles. Again, though, I really enjoyed both these games, and whether you like 3D platformers or 2D platformers, Yooka-Laylee has you covered on both sides. Number 20, Death's Door. Now, there's been a lot of games out there that kind of tries to replicate that top-down Zelda formula, but I don't know if there's a single game out there that does it better than Death's Door, because it doesn't live on being a clone. It still attempts to do its own thing. Yes, the two do share a lot in common, whether that be its Metroidvania world, its puzzles, and even when it comes to its boss fights. But however, when it comes to Death's Door, in my opinion, its combat is actually superior because it's more strategic in how you approach battles. The only part I don't like about this game is its lack of a map for whatever reason. I don't understand, but other than that, Death's Door is an absolutely fantastic game. Number 19, Sea of Stars. Now, this game is flat out beautiful in every sense of the word. Its animations, its art style, its music, its pixel art is just beyond amazing. But even beyond its visuals, there's so much more to Sea of Stars. At first glance, you might recognize its Chrono Trigger inspiration, but it also draws a lot of inspiration from the classic Mario RPG games as well, where you time different button presses to strengthen your attacks or your defense. In my opinion, this element adds an extra layer to its combat that makes it a little bit more engaging. I'll also say that it's a fun coming-of-age story with a well-realized world. Number 18, Animal Well. Now, there's a lot of Metroidvania games out there that either pushes the envelope for combat or for their platforming, but Animal Well is kind of its own animal. It instead emphasizes exploration and atmosphere, which I think is one of the things that makes it just so special. Its atmosphere feels mysterious and dangerous because there is no combat in Animal Well. For what it lacks in combat, though, it more than makes up for in its creative puzzle solving. And I mean, even the upgrades that you discover, they're very unique for a game like this, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. Animal Well is a very special game. Number 17, The Plucky Squire. One of the things that I love the most about independent games is just how creative and innovative they can be. And I think The Plucky Squire is a perfect example of that. It's a whimsical, charming 2D game set in a storybook-like setting, but then the character can also pass over to the 3D realm. And these two components lean directly into one another in how they play. As an example, there might be a word puzzle, and in order to complete it, you'll need to exit the book, flip the pages, and find the word on a completely different page, and then carry it back over. It's just very creative, and more important here is that it's very well executed. If anything else, it's one of the more charming games that you can play right now. Number 16, Cuphead. Now, if you want a tough-as-nails side-scroller, this here is the game for you. I mean, don't let its retro cartoon vibes fool you. This is one of those games where you're gonna die, and you're gonna die a lot. But you always want to come back for more because it never really feels like it's cheap. It does have good mechanics, so even when you die, it's not necessarily too frustrating. And it makes the victory just that much more rewarding. I also have to say that Cuphead is one of the better local co-op games that you can play on the Nintendo Switch. Number 15, Crosscode. Now, this is a legitimate action RPG with a ton, and I mean an absolute ton, of depth to it. Crosscode on average takes about 35 hours to complete, so it's got a lot of content, and even better here is that it's high quality content. You play as an amnesiac character that's stuck in an MMO world for mysterious reasons, and in ways it actually does feel like a real MMO. You'll meet friends that you want to consistently play with, you'll work together to take down dungeons and bosses, there's raids, and in that way, you're kind of playing a game inside of a game. I guess you can just call it Gameception. And one thing that surprised me about Crosscode is that it's not just a good action RPG, but it does have some Zelda-esque dungeons to it with some really well thought out puzzles. Number 14, Pizza Tower. I mean, Pizza Tower is a truly crazy and also brilliant game. It's just this over-the-top 2D platformer that's almost a combination of the Wario Land games, Sonic the Hedgehog, and for that matter, old Cartoon Network shows all blended into one. I mean, if anything here, I think it's a brilliant combination that's just a ton of fun to play and also to look at. You basically play as this pizza man, and he just runs and smashes through levels until he reaches the end, and then he has to hightail it back to the beginning before the level just implodes on itself. It's not so much about surviving like you see in a lot of other platformers, because deaths aren't handled in the same way, but it's just more about pure speed as you rush and fly through each level by taking advantage of its surprisingly expansive kit of moves. Number 13, Chained Echoes. Now, this is a Super Nintendo-inspired turn-based JRPG that ultimately tries to do its own thing, and I think that's what makes this so special. It's not just your everyday run-of-the-mill JRPG that's trying to emulate everything else. It does try to shake things up. First off, there's no random encounters, and its entire combat system is based on an overdrive mechanic where you try to balance out your attacks to stay within a certain parameter. If you go above that parameter, because let's say you're only doing super powerful attacks, well then you might take more damage. That's the trade-off. So they really encourage a more strategical approach instead of just using the same strategy over and over and over again like you see in a lot of other games. Now personally, I really like this system. I think it's much more engaging, and it's innovation like this that really separates Chained Echoes from other games within the genre. Yes, it's familiar, but it's also very different at the same time, all while still being an amazing game. Number 12, Streets of Rage 4 and River City Girls. Yeah, so I went ahead and combined two different games here because you really can't go wrong either way. I mean, sometimes it's just fun to pick up a good beat-em-up style of game, and both of these are some of the best within the genre. Now, in terms of combat, I do prefer Streets of Rage 4 because of its combo system and level design. You do have a number of characters that all feel different, and it offers a lot of replayability. Now, River City Girls, on the other hand, though, is just a fun romp with a really attractive art style and just an over-the-top but still enjoyable story that never really takes itself too serious. The thing about both of these games, though, are that they're both fun to play as a single-player experience, and also they make for some of the better cooperative games as well. Number 11, Tinykin. Now here's an odd but just perfectly executed combination. Tinykin is inspired by the Pikmin formula, where these little minions follow you around, and they all have their own unique abilities to help you out. But it's wrapped into this 3D collectathon platformer, and a surprisingly really good one at that. The little creatures that follow you around give it a puzzle element, which surprisingly works well with its platforming elements. Everything is just quick and snappy, it feels great to play, and then the world itself is also something of note here, because you're actually this tiny little person exploring this massive house, which almost makes you feel like a toy. It's got this childlike wonder to it, and again, while yes, it takes inspiration from several different games, it somehow turns it into its own thing, and I really cannot recommend this one enough for anybody who likes 3D platformers or the Pikmin series. Number 10, Overcooked 2. Now, speaking of cooperative games, a favorite in my household is Overcooked 2, where you work together in some of the most insane and just chaotic kitchens that you can think of. It's just super creative. In one level, you might have to prepare a dish on a flying ship with a platform that's constantly moving back and forth. And then in the next, you might be working on a busy road where, for whatever reason, you have to prepare the food on the opposite side of the street where you actually serve the food. So just kind of prepare to get run over by the incoming traffic. But what I can kind of say about Overcooked is that it feels almost like a Nintendo design game. I mean, that's about as high praise that I can give any type of game. But yes, it is one of those games that almost anybody can jump in and play because it's relatively simple, but there is also a lot of depth, and it's just a fun party game to play. If anything else, it's easily one of the best cooperative games. Number 9, Axiom Verge. I mean, talk about wearing your heart on your sleeve. Axiom Verge is 100% inspired by Metroid. And I say that in the best way possible, because if you're an old school Metroid fan, you're going to feel right at home when you play Axiom Verge. Its combat and exploration is superb, to put it short. There is a lot of secrets to uncover and a lot of weapons to unlock, some of which are missable if you don't explore. The best thing that I can say about Axiom Verge, though, is that when I played it, I just couldn't put it down. It's a blast to play because of its combat and exploration. So if you like Metroidvanias, especially being Metroid herself, I think Axiom Verge is a must-play. Number 8, The Messenger. Now, The Messenger is kind of a tale of two halves. It starts off as this old-school 8-bit action platformer, similar to games like Ninja Gaiden. The mechanics are absolutely phenomenal. That offers a real challenge. But interestingly enough, as you progress, it completely shifts everything, and I mean that quite literally. What was originally a 2D action platformer quickly turns into more of this Metroidvania in the 16-bit era. Then you'll swap in and out of these two dimensions, giving it somewhat puzzle-based elements, and it's all just so unique and masterfully executed. I also just love this game's personality. There's some really fun characters in The Messenger, and I just think this one's a special experience. Number 7, Celeste. Now, typically when you think about good 2D platformers, you don't necessarily think about good stories. But Celeste is kind of different in that sense. It offers an emotionally driven narrative that I think makes it just that much more memorable. Celeste, though, also uses relatively simple mechanics that's easy to understand. You can jump, you can climb, and you can dash. But it's one of those situations where it's easy to learn, hard to master, because Celeste is actually challenging enough to put your skills to the test. Truthfully, I think Celeste is just one of the best in the genre, period. Number 6, Vampire Survivors. Now, when you first see Vampire Survivors, you might think to yourself, this game doesn't look all that great. But I'm telling you right now, there's a reason that people love this game just so much. Yes, it's simple on the surface. You only need one button to play it. But, and there's a big but here, it's a blast to play, and it's also very addicting. In fact, here's a true story for you. I was playing Vampire Survivors a year or so back, and my wife saw me play it, and she's like, "Why are you playing this? This looks dumb." So I look at her, and I'm like, okay, instead of me explaining this, let me just go and give you the controller and see what you think. Now, she's not a gamer or anything like that, but Vampire Survivors, again, is only a one-button game, so it's pretty easy to grasp. And a long story short, I never got the controller back, and it was well past midnight before she put it down. So yes, Vampire Survivors is a very good game, and it's one of the few games that I can easily recommend to pretty much anybody, regardless if they're a longtime gamer or not. Number 5, Tunic. Now, there's certain games that has essentially created their own genres. You have your Souls-likes, and you have your Zelda-likes. But what if I told you there's a game out there, and a really good one at that encapsulates both of those experiences into one? Yeah, don't let the art style fool you. It might look cutesy on the surface, but Tunic is a very difficult game inspired by the Soulsborne series. It does have quote-unquote bonfires, and it's got that methodical combat approach. Now, its Zelda-like nature, I'd say that's a little bit more in your face with its puzzles and its Metroidvania-like world, but I'll tell you this much. This is now one of my favorite combinations because Tunic and its mysterious world is one of my favorite games that I've played in the last few years. Number 4, Omori. Now, what originally looks like a sweet and charming game quickly turns into one of the more serious and dark games that I've ever played. Omori is a turn-based RPG on the surface, but it's the story and the characters that will truly make your jaw drop, and I mean it will absolutely drop by the end of this game. I'm telling you, I was blown away, and part of that is just because of how connected I felt to all of the characters. Like, they honestly feel real because of how well they're written, and the story is just mind-blowing. I don't want to say too much because I think this game is best played if you go in blind, but just kind of understand that it is a horror game that deals with very serious subjects, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. Number 3, Bug Fables. So I think we all kind of know that Nintendo can be a bit of a weird company. They just kind of do their own thing, and despite fans begging for a brand new Paper Mario game with the classic formula, they've yet to give us that. I mean, to be fair here, the Mario & Luigi series is back, which is a good sign, and they also did the Paper Mario Thousand Year Door remake just earlier this year. But if you're looking for a brand new Paper Mario-like experience, then I'd say Bug Fables is your game. Right away, it's pretty clear where its inspiration came from, and they just run with it. I mean, you have those interactive turn-based battles, you can solve puzzles throughout its world, and it is brimming with personality. Now, there, however, are a few things that really surprised me about Bug Fables. If you want a more rewarding, challenging experience, you can actually get that in this game if you want to ramp its difficulty up. And on top of that, it does have an enjoyable story with endearing characters. Truly, this is among my favorite games that's released in recent years, and if you're a Paper Mario fan like I am, I'm telling you, just play Bug Fables. You'll thank me later. Number 2, Hollow Knight and Ori. Okay, so here I have another entry combining two different games, being Hollow Knight and the Ori series, being Ori and the Blind Forest and then Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Now, both of these are Metroidvanias, but they actually focus on very different things. On one side, you have Hollow Knight, which is more of a combat-driven game that can be described as a Souls-like. Like any Metroidvania, you'll have a massive map that you can backtrack as you unlock new abilities, but this is a very challenging and atmospheric experience with that risk-reward mechanic that you see in the Souls-like genre. Ori, on the other hand, prioritizes platforming. There's even boss sequences that truly put your platforming skills to the test, and I really believe that this game can go toe-to-toe with some of the best platformers out there. Though I will say this much. I think Ori and the Will of the Wisp is my favorite among the three entries here because it tells an emotional story, the art style is beautiful, and alongside its masterful platforming, it also has a really good combat system. All in all, though, all three of these games, Hollow Knight, Ori and the Blind Forest, and Ori and the Will of the Wisps, you really can't go wrong with any three of these games. They are all top of their class. And at the number one spot, the game that just absolutely blew me away is none other than Hades. I mean, honestly, Hades is just in a class of its own. This is a true masterpiece in every sense of the word. Now, essentially, you play as Zagreus, the son of Hades, and he's set out to escape the underworld and his father's rule. In order to do that, Zagreus will go room to room and fight off waves and waves of enemies. But if you die, you'll then have to restart back from the beginning. And while that might sound frustrating, it never really feels that way in Hades. I mean, it's kind of strange to say that, but in this game, it almost feels like you're rewarded when you die because the story itself is really interesting. The characters are just captivating enough to keep you invested. So when you die, You basically get a chance to learn more about its world, its story, and its characters. Then on top of that, each attempt to escape the underworld always feels different because with each room you clear, you then have a choice to take one of multiple paths. Each path will reward you with an ability or an upgrade. So there's a lot of strategy involved that can completely change how you approach each run. There's also various weapons that all feels completely different. And that's the thing. There's just so many layers when it comes to Hades. I mean, seriously, you can easily sink 50 plus or even 100 plus hours into Hades, and it will still be just as fun as when you first started. So from its story to its characters to just its overall gameplay, Hades, again, is an absolute masterpiece, to put it short. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed this list of 30 games. I mean, truthfully, there's so many more independent games out there that you can play. And for that matter, let me hear about some of your favorites in the comments below. But until next time, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more content just like this, and peace out.